One day, war broke out between the Roman Republic and the Kingdom of Eperia, or it was called Epirus. Now, the Roman Republic was a Greek country. It was a Greek system that grew in maritime power in the Mediterranean. The Kingdom of Epirus was also a Greek country, but the Kingdom of Epirus was smaller, but it was a firm established kingdom. It was a wealthy kingdom also. The Roman Republic wanted to include the Epirus kingdom into the jurisdiction. In that case, the king of Epirus would have become a client king of Rome, and Epirus would become an autonomous country with the military and maritime protection of Rome. And it would receive all the benefits that Rome would provide, like building roads, bridges, maritime ports. The kingdom of Epirus was a great gain to Rome. Here is the thing, however. The people of Epirus had no intention of submitting to Rome whatsoever, even though they basically were the same people and they had the same culture. The king of Epirus granted his people their wish. He mobilized an army against the Romans. And amongst the people in Epirus were many that financed the war against Rome. So they thought, we're just going to fight this war, within 2 months it's over. After a while, years had gone by, and there was still the war kept on going. And here's the thing, the men that fought the war kept dying. But people made a pledge to finance the war, so they had to keep financing it. After a while, the treasury of the kingdom of Epirus was empty. And not only that, the wealth of the Epirus nation also, as a whole, dried up. There was almost no money left in the country. But the king issued counterfeit currency to hide this. So the people were not aware that the money he had in their pocket was counterfeit. It wasn't real silver. Rome, at the other hand, was very well aware of what happened. And here's the trick. Rome knew that they needed providers to make arms for them. So what did Rome do? Rome approached the providers, those that made the swords, those that made the uniforms. Their providers did not came from Epirus itself. They came from other Greek city-states. Rome was already in contract covertly with those city-states. And those city-states agreed to increase their prices for their goods. So the kingdom of Epirus, while they were purchasing their military provisions, they had to pay a lot of money. And that money they had to pay ended up with Rome. So they were financing Rome without being aware of it. Meanwhile, Rome lost battle after battle. But Rome still kept sending troops. Some of the Italians back then asked themselves why Rome kept sending troops if they kept losing the battles. Some even began to think, why are those politicians in Rome so dumb that they keep fighting in Epirus, why they keep losing battles? In fact, let me say like this, when you look at the situation, it seemed as if Rome had lost and Rome refused to give up, and Epirus had won. That's how it appeared when you looked at the facts. The truth, however, was that Epirus was destroying itself. After 5 years, the country was bankrupt. Not only the government, but the people were also bankrupt and they weren't even aware of it. All the money they invested and spent on the military ended up in Rome's hands, so Rome withdrew all their wealth without them being aware of it. So Rome kept sending weak troops, of which Rome knew those weak troops would be defeated. Rome did not send their best men to just take out the country in once, because Rome knew they would keep spending money financing this war, and if you just make sure that those that deliver their arms are in our pocket, which Rome already had, then Rome knew they would keep spending money on that war, and the money would end up in Rome's hands. So Rome would gain the wealth of Epirus without Epirus being aware of it. And meanwhile, because they kept sending their men to die in those wars, their military capacity also decreased. So after 5 years, financially and economically, Epirus had fallen apart, it had collapsed, and militarily, they lost many young men. So their army was only 10% of its original size. But the people were in denial. They did not want to face the situation, and the Epirus people did not want to face the fact that their currency was debased. They didn't. One day, however, the people hit a brick wall. They had to face reality. Many of the young men in their country died in that war. So they had an overpopulation of females. Around 70% of the population was female, and the young men were few. So the workforce, because most of the work in infrastructure and the hard work was done by young men, so they had a lack in economic forces. They had a lack in workers. So one way to fill this gap was to hire foreigners. But to hire foreigners would gain a hold of Epirus. But the economy had to continue, but they needed workers, because many of the young men who would have been the workers were dead. And here's the trick: Rome had hundreds of thousands of men prepared to fight in the army. Men who were far more capable than the men Rome sent to Epirus year after year. It was Rome's strategy to exhaust Epirus. And it worked. People in Epirus population, when they found out and they had to face the situation, man, they raged. They became angry. Very, very angry. They couldn't get all that money back they spent on the war. They couldn't get the lives of those young men back that died while defending Epirus. They couldn't get the time back that they spent thinking they were heading in the right direction, but they weren't. And now they had to face their own collapse very soon, while Rome would slowly take over. Oh, and here's the thing: they realized that Rome had already taken over because all their abundance was gone. When they faced this, the people lost it, and they began to take it out on one another. So they began to devour one another. A lot of fights broke out day after day. A lot of angry issues arose in the country. So the country became ungovernable. So after a while, the king of Epirus and the royal house sent a letter to Rome in which they surrendered. So Rome came and victoriously established their government in the capital of Epirus. And the people did not want to accept it, but hey, they became far more weak as a people because they began to devour one another, that Rome didn't even have to do much. And remember, they had a shortage of workers, right? So many slaves from Gaul, many slaves from other parts of the Roman Republic came over to inhabit the place. And because there was an abundance of women, they got involved with those women and began to procreate also. So now the Epirus people became a minority in their own homeland. Well, a century passed, and one of the descendants of the remainders of the Epirus ethnicity became an historian, and he had to evaluate how his country turned out to be just a Roman province. And when he went through the historical records, he was shocked. He was shocked by the denial of his ancestors. How those people just refused to agree with reality. And the guy who was a historian realized, hold on a minute, if the king of Epirus would have just submitted unto Rome, the kingdom of Epirus would have remained in existence, and it only would become a client of Rome. They would retain their autonomous position, while at the same time they would have prospered even more under the jurisdiction of the Roman Republic. Because as a part of the Roman Republic, or as a client of the Roman Republic, they would have gained a seat in the Senate, and they would have gained influence in the world's affairs. Apart from the Roman Republic, they were just an independent nation. But as part of the Roman Republic, they gained power in the say of the Roman military, the Roman navy, and also international politics. So there was great gain politically and financially, therefore also culturally, for the Epirus people to become part of the Roman Republic. And here's the thing, they were both Greek populations, so they had the same culture, the same language. So what was the big deal? This historian just couldn't understand the stubbornness of his ancestors. How they literally destroyed themselves, financed their own destruction, because they didn't want to give up their unexamined expectations. And those unexamined expectations were false to begin with. Now look, the real history of Rome and Epirus went a bit different than what I just told here. What I just told here is a parable. And in this parable, I want to explain the following to you. The people that refused to acknowledge your anointing, I'm talking to believers now. Those that refused to acknowledge your anointing, those that refused to acknowledge your influence, those that refuse to get along with your influence, because remember, when you are anointed, it's the same as being appointed by Christ himself. Those that refuse to get along with your influence, listen to what I'm saying here. Their resistance will backfire onto them, and their resistance will haunt them. Soon, they'll find out that you are the one walking in victory, escaping and overcoming all the traps, while they are the ones left behind, embittered, resentful. And that bitterness and resentment will by itself draw danger onto them. So they will be the ones left with the danger, and they're the ones that have to cope with all the negativity that will come onto them because of their agreement against you. When they realize this, and they realize that there is no way for them to be left alone at all, they'll repress this knowledge by ignoring it, pretending you never existed, or in any way try to pretend you were never around. But that's not going to happen. Sooner or later, that resistance of theirs will become so obvious and so painful and so heavy that those people will lose it. They'll lose their minds. And when they lose their minds, they will act out in rage to those around them. So they will begin to self-destruct. And here's the thing though, if they would have gotten along with your influence, there would have been nothing but benefits for them. But because they're proud, but because their will is so important, and because their pride depends upon you being nothing, upon you being the rejected one, And because that validation is now disturbed and frustrated, they blame you. You just want relief. They don't want to examine themselves. They don't want to comply with justice. But just like the people of Epirus, they keep financing negativity towards you. They keep energizing demons against you. But while they're doing that, they are draining themselves. They are exhausting themselves. And the demons that feed off of it become more powerful at their expense. And there's the thing though, those demons start becoming more powerful under your feet. So those demons cannot do you much, or best, it can't do you anything. But they keep financing them. So while they keep financing those demons then begin to haunt them. Alright? In paganism, they call this karma. Well, I'm not in the teaching of karma, but it comes down to this. When you keep financing the negative, there comes a point that your own investment will haunt you. And that is what eventually happens to everyone that agrees against those that are anointed. Because just like Rome had enough troops to replace those that died, the anointing you have carries so much provision that your anointing outlives all the assaults upon you. While those that finance those assaults, their resources are very limited, and they're not aware when they are collapsing. Because here's the thing, the demons that feed off of them want them to continue to finance their negative agreements against you. The demons want them to remain in pride, so the demons are going to grant them some smooth successes here and there to blind them from seeing what's really going on. Just like Rome did with the Epirus people, in which Rome had to deal with those that delivered the arms. Because the Epirus people had to purchase their arms somewhere. Well, those that delivered the arms, their prices rose, and the Epirus people kept paying the high prices. Meanwhile, those high prices were transferred onto Rome. Well, that's the trick demons are using. Demons will give you smooth success that eventually will cost you everything. But you often just walk in it without being aware of it. Well, just realize that sooner or later, well, rather sooner, anyone that agreed against you in one way or the other, I don't care where they are, they'll find out, they'll face the bitter reality. The reality isn't bitter, but it's bitter unto them, because they'll have to swallow the facts. But most likely, they will rage against the facts and further go into bondage and destruction. Meanwhile, you are made free, walking by faith over here. I'm just telling you as it is. I experienced a similar thing. When a lot of folks that agreed against me realized that they are the ones left with all the consequences and with the bad energies that they had to cope with, they lost it. They went out of their mind and eventually they disappeared. I don't know how they are now. I'm not even interested in that. You will go through similar things. Okay? Christ said in the world of tribulation, or Christ also said, "Be of good cheer, I've overcome the world." I seldom use Rome as a positive example in my parables, but in this case, be like Rome. Look at the bigger picture. Be like Rome. Sometimes the best thing to do is allow the enemy's camp to deplete itself. And after it depletes itself, they'll collapse on themselves, while you, in peace, are expanding. Well, that's all for this video. Agree with Christ and be at peace.